A Scandal in Bohemia. By Arthur Conan Doyle. Chapter 1. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler. All emotions, and that one particularly, were abhorrent to his cold, precise but admirably balanced mind. He was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine that the world has seen, but as a lover, he would have placed himself in a false position. He never spoke of the softer passions, save with a jibe and a sneer. They were admirable things for the observer, excellent for drawing the veil from men's motives and actions. But for the trained reasoner to admit such intrusions into his own delicate and finely adjusted temperament was to introduce a distracting factor which might throw a doubt upon all his mental results. Grit in a sensitive instrument, or a crack in one of his own high-power lenses, would not be more disturbing than a strong emotion in a nature such as his. And yet there was but one woman to him, and that woman was the late Irene Adler, of dubious and questionable memory. I had seen little of Holmes lately. My marriage had drifted us away from each other. My own complete happiness, and the home-centered interests which rise up around the man who first finds himself master of his own establishment, were sufficient to absorb all my attention, while Holmes, who loathed every form of society with his whole Bohemian soul, remained in our lodgings in Baker Street, buried among his old books, and alternating from week to week between cocaine and ambition, the drowsiness of the drug, and the fierce energy of his own keen nature. He was still, as ever, deeply attracted by the study of crime, and occupied his immense faculties and extraordinary powers of observation in following out those clues, and clearing up those mysteries which had been abandoned as hopeless by the official police. From time to time I heard some vague account of his doings, of his summons to Odessa in the case of the Trepoff murder, of his clearing up of the singular tragedy of the Atkinson brothers at Trincomalee, and finally of the mission which he had accomplished so delicately and successfully for the reigning family of Holland. Beyond these signs of his activity, however, which I merely shared with all the readers of the daily press, I knew little of my former friend and companion. One night, it was on the 20th of March, 1888, I was returning from a journey to a patient, for I had now returned to civil practice, when my way led me through Baker Street. As I passed the well-remembered door, which must always be associated in my mind with my wooing, and with the dark incidents of the study in scarlet, I was seized with a keen desire to see Holmes again, and to know how he was employing his extraordinary powers. His rooms were brilliantly lit, and, even as I looked up, I saw his tall, spare figure pass twice in a dark silhouette against the blind. He was pacing the room swiftly, eagerly, with his head sunk upon his chest and his hands clasped behind him. To me, who knew his every mood and habit, his attitude and manner told their own story. He was at work again. He had risen out of his drug-created dreams and was hot upon the scent of some new problem. I rang the bell and was shown up to the chamber which had formerly been in part my own. Sherlock Holmes rose and lit his pipe. Chapter 2. With your permission, he said as he sank into his chair and began to puff away at the long black clay pipe. I am afraid that I am interrupting your romance, Watson, but I have had a busy day, and I should prefer to discuss a matter of fact. I understand that you have been away from London for some weeks? Yes, I have been staying with a patient in the country. You are eager to see your old friend and get back to town life once more. But first, let me ask you a few questions. I was startled, for I had not said a word since I had entered the room. He sat quietly smoking, his eyes fixed upon the ceiling, his thin, eager face in a golden glow from the radiant heat of the lamp. Holmes continued. These are merely trivial matters, but I think you will find them instructive. What is your opinion of the case I have in hand? I turned to look at him, and found him regarding me with those keen, questioning eyes. I have seen nothing of the case. True. I was afraid that you might have forgotten me in the romance of your new life. I shall never forget you, Holmes. Chapter 3. Holmes leaned back in his chair and laughed. I think that I shall have a few days of fun out of this case, Watson. I have a great deal of respect for the King of Bohemia, but I have more for Irene Adler. It is a matter of honor, you see. And how do you propose to get the photograph? I asked. That is where my disguise comes in, said he. I have already thought of a plan. I shall take a servant's role in her household. If I can gain her trust, I might be able to retrieve the photograph without any fuss. I nodded, impressed. Holmes was a master of disguise and deception, and I had no doubt he would carry this out with his usual finesse. Chapter 4. The next morning, Holmes made his preparations. He donned the guise of a humble groom and set off for Irene Adler's residence. I followed at a distance, eager to witness the unraveling of this intriguing mystery. As I watched from the shadows, I could see Holmes enter the house. He carried himself with the confidence of a man on a mission. I waited anxiously, my mind racing with possibilities. After a short while, Holmes emerged, a look of triumph on his face. He had gained entry into Adler's home and had a plan to retrieve the photograph. I knew that whatever happened next would be nothing short of spectacular. Chapter 5. The following evening, Holmes put his plan into action. He knocked on the door of Irene Adler's house and was admitted as the new groom. Under the guise of caring for her horse, he subtly observed her and her surroundings. Days passed, and Holmes patiently waited for the right moment to strike. One evening, he witnessed Adler return home with a photograph in her possession. With a clever ruse, Holmes set off a commotion to create a distraction. Amid the chaos, he slipped into the room where the photograph was kept. But as he reached for it, he discovered that Adler had already anticipated his move. She was cleverer than he had expected. Chapter 6. The next day, Holmes was deep in thought. He couldn't shake the feeling that Adler had outsmarted him. After all his efforts, she had vanished with the photograph. Just then, a messenger arrived with a letter. It was from Irene Adler. In it, she explained her decision to keep the photograph, acknowledging Holmes's cleverness and respecting his skills. However, she assured him that she would never use it against the King of Bohemia. Holmes read the letter with admiration. He realized that she was not just an adversary, but a worthy opponent. She had played the game and won. Chapter 7. Holmes reflected on the events that had transpired. He understood that Irene Adler was a woman unlike any other. In her, he saw not just a rival, but someone who matched his intellect and wit. He made a note to himself, never underestimate the power of a woman. The photograph remained with Adler, but her promise gave Holmes peace of mind. As I listened to him speak, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the unfolding story. Holmes had been bested, but he accepted it with grace and admiration for the woman who had outsmarted him. Chapter 8. In the days that followed, Holmes often spoke of Irene Adler with a mix of respect and admiration. The case had left an indelible mark on him, and he frequently revisited the events in his mind. I watched as he resumed his work, his passion for solving mysteries reignited. Yet, in the back of my mind, I wondered if this encounter had changed him in ways he might not yet fully comprehend. Holmes, however, remained the same enigmatic figure I had always known, driven by his insatiable curiosity and relentless pursuit of truth.